Hello and welcome to this Unit 11 video lecture on the Macedonians, Philip II and his son Alexander III, known to history as Alexander the Great. We will, in this unit, be picking up our story, and remember, our story has so far been one in which the Greek city-states, or polis, will manage to band together, at least 31 of them will, to form the Hellenic League and defend Greece from Persian invasion. And after that, of course, with the Persians vanquished as a threat, the Greek polis will vie with one another for dominance within the Greek world itself. We will see Athens take the early lead by developing the Delian League, an Aegean-wide empire, and with Athens at its head. And we'll see how the Delian League will cause much resentment in the Greek world, and ultimately Sparta will decide to lead its allies, the Peloponnesian League, against Athens and its allies, the Delian League, and how this will set the stage for the 27-year-long Peloponnesian War, which will basically exhaust the Greek world. By the time it's over, of course, Sparta, with Persian aid, manages to eke out a victory, but we'll see how Sparta itself won't be able to hold on to its hegemony or dominance for very long, as the rising power of Thebes will challenge Sparta and ultimately displace Sparta, thanks to the brilliance of the Theban commander Epaminondas, who in the year 371 BC will destroy a Spartan phalanx at the Battle of Leuctra. Thebes, however, will not be able to enjoy its moment in the sun for very long. Epaminondas will be killed in the year 362, and it seems that with his death, Thebes does not have the wherewithal to maintain its position of hegemony. So by the time we get into the 360s, into the 350s, the Greek world is exhausted and there is no clear leader. And this, of course, is an opportune moment for the Kingdom of Macedon to begin to assert itself. Now, this is a story that really will change the course of history, because those Macedonian soldiers you see there, those phalangites, members of a phalanx, armed as they are with their 18-foot-long pikes or sarissas, those guys will project power, Macedonian power, but in a way also Greek power. When we merge the two, the traditional Greek culture along with the Macedonian culture, we get what's called Hellenism or Hellenistic culture. And these soldiers, led as they are by first Philip and then Alexander, are going to take this Hellenistic culture well beyond its traditional homeland, certainly eastward, as the Persian Empire will meet a foe that it will not be able to withstand. So let's begin with the humble origins of the Kingdom of Macedon. For much of its history, it was considered, certainly by the Greeks to the south, Macedon was considered a backwater. It was kind of hillbilly country. Culturally, Macedonians also, practiced polygamy. They drank their wine straight without diluting it with water, as the Greeks to the south did. They liked brawling and fighting. Again, they were very much considered uncouth barbarians by the Greeks to the south. And that's not to say, though, that this was not a place without great potential, if ever it could become unified. And that was always the major challenge for any king of Macedonia. And I should point out that Macedon was a kingdom, and it was led by a monarch, but that monarch oftentimes had trouble projecting his authority much beyond his own palace walls. But if ever a charismatic, powerful ruler could unite the people of Macedon and exploit its great material resources and its large population, well then, Macedon would be a power to be reckoned with. But again, significant obstacles in the way. As I've mentioned, Macedonian kings could not really control the nobility. Oftentimes, the nobles were in many ways more powerful than the kings themselves. And because, as I've mentioned, the Macedonians practiced polygamy, oftentimes you'd have a king with multiple wives, many different children, particularly sons, and if ever that king died, the sons by different wives would often compete with one another to see who would attain the throne. And this civil war, this propensity for civil war, was often advanced by the Greek city-states to the south, who would support one son over another, one pretender over the legitimate candidate. And that would oftentimes destabilize the kingdom of Macedon for long periods of time. And of course, this was within the interest. This was in the interests of the Greeks because they didn't want a powerful rival to their north. So, and it worked. Macedon again was kind of a political basket case for long periods of its history. But that will abruptly change in the year 359 BCE when the reigning king Perdiccas III is killed fighting Illyrians, who were barbarians living to the northwestern fringe of the Macedonian kingdom in this area here. And Perdiccas and 4,000 of his Macedonian soldiers would be killed in a great defeat. And although Perdiccas has a young son, the boy is too young. He's 2 or 3 years old at the time. So the decision is made to appoint Perdiccas' younger brother, Philip, to become king. Initially, he's going to be regent until the legitimate son of Perdiccas gets old enough to reign on his own. But Philip clearly shows that he's the man, and he is much more capable than any Macedonian king that had previously sat in the throne. So Philip will immediately get to work. First of all, he's got to stabilize his kingdom, and then he'll see where he can take things. Now, a couple of things to note about Philip. First and foremost, which I find interesting, is that Philip did live in the city of Thebes during the time of Epaminondas. As we'll see here in a moment, one of the things that Philip is most known for is creating the Macedonian war machine, which in the ancient period was considered second only perhaps to the Roman legion, which will later develop. But when we see the reforms that Philip will institute in the Macedonian army, a lot of Theban influence seems to be present. You guys have been through the unit on Epaminondas and on his victory over the Spartans at Leuctra. You should remember that Thebes during this time had a professional force that was paid by the city, the sacred band, and these professionals were the nucleus of a broader Theban military, and they were the key oftentimes to success because of their discipline and their fighting ability. So I can imagine Philip learning 2 lessons from his time living in Thebes. First, visiting with Epaminondas, maybe at a dinner party or some other social occasion. Epaminondas would probably go on and expound about his tactics that he used against the Spartans at Leuctra. But also Philip would have been much impressed by how the Thebans had used state funds to support a full-time professional military force. And these are lessons I think that Philip will learn and later incorporate. Indeed, one of the clues to this is that after the death of his brother Perdiccas III and Philip is appointed king, the first thing he does is to take control of a city called Amphipolis, which is located right about here, if you can see where my cursor is flashing. And the reason is Amphipolis was known to have very wealthy gold mines, and for Philip, who has got big plans, knows that if he wants to create a professional force, not just 300 like the Theban sacred band, but say 30,000, he's going to need the cash. He's going to need the money to pull these guys off their farms, off their whatever they're doing for sustenance, and provide them with a wage so that all they do is train, train, train. And the gold mines at Amphipolis will allow him the wealth to do this. Now, the building block of the Macedonian war machine will be the phalanx, but it will look very little like the traditional hoplite phalanx that was developed for part-time farmers and part-time warriors. This phalanx is going to be a whole different level of sophistication, in part because of the primary killing weapon that will be wielded by the Macedonian phalangite. And again, phalangite is a term to describe a soldier serving within a phalanx. And I'm talking here about the sarissa, which will be a pike about 18 feet long. And in this image, you can see the figure to the left is equipped as a Macedonian phalangite, and you can see the prominence of that sarissa and the advantage it gives him over the figure to the right, who is equipped as a traditional Greek hoplite. And if you can get a bunch of these guys to wield this weapon with cohesion, you can have yourself a formidable war machine. And that's exactly what Philip will do. Using the material assets he will gain at Amphipolis and other places, he is going to build an army of tens of thousands, and he's going to incorporate them into phalanxes that look something like this. This is called a syntagma. You've got 16 men wide, 16 men deep. And so a total of 256 soldiers. They're all wielding the sarissa. And you can see that because of the length, the 18-foot long pike, you can extend a lot of these pike heads, these spearheads, well beyond the front of the phalanx. And this gives you quite an edge when you are rolling against a rival who is not equipped as you are. You can also see that those phalangites who cannot contact the enemy because they're too far to the rear will deploy their sarissas angled upward, and this we think is to deflect away any kind of missiles that may come down on the phalanx itself. If you kind of just wave your sarissa a little bit, you may be able to deflect an arrow that is angled trajectory downwards coming down at you. So very impressive formation, but it is only the first part. The second will be cavalry, specifically the companion cavalry. Now, if you note the black text there, you can see that Macedonia itself geographically is divided into highland and lowland. The southern part of the kingdom of Macedon is flat. And the Macedonians had always had a tradition of raising horses, certainly the nobility. You couldn't at this point in history use horses for farm work, so it was a prestige animal. But that's the whole point of being a noble. You get to work on your horseman skills, and when warfare does break out, you can ride into battle. So the Macedonians had a long and proud tradition of superior horsemanship. And this is going to give Philip and the Macedonians a key advantage if ever they have to go up against the Greeks to the south. Because Greece to the south is mountainous and rocky, there is no real tradition there of using horses in large numbers in battle. And this is what Philip will use to achieve his victories. So we've got a very sophisticated military formation that Philip will introduce. And again, I'm not going to get into all the nuts and bolts of the various subunits. I think this diagram is complicated enough to indicate to you that these are soldiers who are going to have to be trained to work together as a machine. Indeed, historians have often noted that the Macedonian war machine worked like a hammer and an anvil. The anvil would be the phalanx to pin an opponent. The hammer itself will be the companion cavalry. And you can see that red block in the middle would represent the enemy who is about to get crushed between the two pieces of the Macedonian war machine. And with the hammer and anvil system, Philip will experience success in campaigns against his northern neighbors, the Illyrians to the northwest and the Thracians to the northeast. And this will give his newly constructed army much valuable experience in actual battlefield conditions. And Philip, within about a decade, will stabilize his position enough where he will cast an eye southward to the Greek world, and will begin to insinuate himself into the affairs of the Greek polis. And I won't get into the specifics of how he does this, but he is effective enough where many Greeks begin to view him very warily. Not all Greeks. It's interesting to note that Greek opinion about Philip is going to be split amongst two camps, two viewpoints. The first in red text there is going to be represented by Isocrates, who was a noted pan-Hellenist. Pan-Hellenists are people who believe, are Greeks who believe, that the Greeks need to stop fighting amongst themselves. They need to unify, to use their potential, their resources, their strength, to defeat the greater enemy, which was the Persian Empire. And over time, Isocrates, he held this pan-Hellenistic dream of his for decades. And as he grows older, he despairs of ever this becoming a reality. He believes that the Greek city-states simply don't have it within themselves to ever willingly cooperate. They need a charismatic figure that will basically get everybody on board with this vision of a crusade against the Persians. And Isocrates, by the time he's into his 60s, getting into his 70s, this is when Philip is beginning his rise to prominence. And Isocrates immediately recognizes Philip as the guy who can get the job done. Now, a lot of his fellow Greeks are not going to buy this at all. They say to themselves, yes, the Persian Empire is a threat. They are a historic enemy. But Philip is a much greater threat. I mean, the Persians are a distant enemy. Philip is right on our northern border. This more skeptical approach towards Philip is going to be represented by the Athenian orator Demosthenes, who is going to come out with a series of very hard-hitting speeches. Historically, they're known as the Philippics, speaking out against Philip and identifying him as the Greek world's primary enemy. And this is going to go back and forth for a bit, but ultimately self-interest will win out, and the Greek polis are going to recognize indeed Philip not as a friend and leader, but as a threat. And in 338, we see the two of the more prominent polis, Athens and Thebes, decide to form an alliance specifically with the intent of countering Macedonian power and preventing Philip from encroaching any more closer than he already has. He has already made significant inroads in creating political alliances within the region of Thessaly. So he has begun to move southward diplomatically. But when this alliance is formed, Philip recognizes that diplomacy probably is not going to do the job. He's going to have to defeat these city-states that are most adamantly opposed to him. And in part, Philip is taking a long view because he remembers quite vividly that the Greek polis, particularly Athens, had constantly involved themselves in Macedonian politics, fueling civil war and instability by supporting rival candidates for the throne of King of Macedon. And so Philip recognizes that, look, maybe these guys are on the ropes right now. They're weak, they're divided, but who knows what the future will hold. They could find themselves in a position where they're going to try to undermine me by supporting somebody. So I'm going to take care of business and defeat this military threat to my further success. So on August the 2nd, 338 BC, a battle is fought, and it's one of those battles that really is kind of, changes the course of events for the future. The battle is at Chania, and Chania itself is located just to the north of Thebes. And what we'll see here is the Athenians and Thebans are going to provide hoplites for this. The Thebans are by far the more professional force. You and I have covered the Sacred Band, and that's a unit that's still around and active. And because the Thebans were considered the more professional of the force, the more formidable, they get the position of honor on the Greek right of the line. And of course the Greeks here are represented in red, and the Theban Sacred Band is going to be on the very right, the position of honor. The Athenians are nowhere near as capable. Remember, the Athenians had for decades poured all their military energy into building naval power. Their hoplite skills had eroded over time, and this is going to be key in understanding how this battle will play out. So the Athenians and Thebans line up as traditional hoplite phalanxes, and it is Philip's deployment that is much more interesting, I think. Philip will be on the Macedonian right in the place of honor, and he will take control of the main phalanx. His weaker formations, he is going to oblique away from the Greeks. And here we see more than a passing kind of similarity with what is known as the Theban wedge, as developed by Epaminondas to fight the Spartans at the Battle of Leuctra. And this idea of obliquing your weaker flank away from the enemy while hoping to get a knockout blow on your stronger flank, that, I think, ironically, is coming out of the Theban playbook. And to the very left is the companion cavalry, who will be commanded by 18-year-old Alexander, son of Philip. And the way the battle unfolds is very interesting according to the sources. Philip will begin the battle by ordering the advance of his main phalanx here against the Athenians. And the Athenians will advance to meet this phalanx, and then Philip gives the signal for his phalanx to begin to retreat and to begin to walk backwards. And the Athenians, who again are amateurs at best, get excited by this. They feel like Philip is fleeing the field. We've intimidated this guy. He's not such a big deal after all. And the Athenians begin basically chasing the Macedonian phalanx. And what happens is the Athenians move forward out of position. The Thebans, who are much more disciplined, much more professional, hold their position. Now what you have is a gap emerging right about here as the Athenians begin to move forward. The Thebans stay where they are. And when this gap emerges, this is the key. Alexander, commanding the companion cavalry, will strike like a lightning bolt, coming down, hitting the flank of the Athenians at the very same time that Philip has ordered a renewed advance of his main phalanx. So it doesn't take much to shatter the Athenian position, and then Alexander can hit the flank of the Athenians, come around behind the Theban Sacred Band at the very same time that these weaker formations have all focused on pinning the Thebans from the front. So in effect, you're going to get a 1-2 punch in which the Athenians are first dislocated, and then the Thebans themselves will be dislocated and ultimately destroyed. The Sacred Band will die to a man. They'll all be killed on the field there. And Philip is so impressed at their courage and bravery that he erects a monument, a statue of a lion, which is still on the field itself to commemorate the bravery of the Sacred Band. But with this one battle, Philip is basically master of Greece. And of course, he doesn't want to be too heavy-handed with the Greeks. He knows that they're all proud, and he wants to rule with a light touch, and he wants to get them immediately focused on his vision of a grand crusade against the Persian Empire. So what he will do is basically forcibly enroll the Greek city-states, all of them except for Sparta. He keeps Sparta out of his alliance, which will be termed the League of Corinth. And again, the stated goal of this League of Corinth is to invade the Persian Empire. And things are going very much according to plan because, again, Philip is not just a kind of a military brute. He has a great deal of diplomatic finesse. He will treat the defeated opponents with great respect. And over time, again, that vision of Isocrates of a pan-Hellenic crusade begins to gain some traction within Greek public opinion. And it looks like, this is a green light for the invasion of the Persian Empire. Now, unfortunately for Philip, certainly, and the Macedonian effort, in 336 BCE, 2 years after the stunning victory at Chania, Philip is assassinated by a young Macedonian nobleman named Pausanias. And this is one of history's great mysteries as to why Pausanias did this, who put him up to it. The sources indicate that it was a very personal issue that triggered the assassination. But quite frankly, many historians look at Alexander's mother, Olympias, as perhaps the orchestrator of this plot. At least she had some role in it. And the reason is that Philip had taken a younger wife. Remember, polygamy is the name of the game amongst Macedonian kings. Had taken a younger wife, a full-blooded Macedonian girl. Olympias, Alexander's mother, was from Epirus. She wasn't considered a Macedonian. And Philip's bride had just given birth to a young boy, and this boy would have been full-blood Macedonian. Alexander is not full-blood Macedonian because, again, his mother Olympias is an Epiriot, not a Macedonian. So we get a sense that perhaps Olympias was concerned about her son's future because Alexander, by this time he's 20 years old, he was set to be Philip's primary heir. Now you've got this little boy being born. That could have messed up everything. So as soon as Philip is assassinated, Alexander is immediately proclaimed by some supporters as the next king of Macedonia. And it does work. There are some challenges to Alexander initially, but he moves swiftly to crush them. And at the age of 20, Alexander will become the next king of Macedonia.